in your December 13th, 2022, the Transportation Advisory Committee. So, first order of business, review and approve minutes. So what have we got, Phil? Well, you're muted. You're muted.
Sorry, we have minutes to beat the band. I think we have minutes for 5 months, maybe.
4, I think.
4 months.
4 and a gap, right? There was no November.
There was
There
no,
was no November and there was no
Oh,
August.
no, August. That's true. So
right.
6 months and a gap, couple of gaps.
Okay, so those have been, people have reviewed those, and any corrections or comments or problems with them?
I think that they're generally really good. The October meeting neglects to state me as present, so I just need to be added to that, even though I'm quoted in comment, during the meeting. So I was there in October. No big deal. And the other
No,
thing
Phil, that's
is,
me. Don't worry. That was my fault.
I'm not taking it personally. And on the second page of the June meeting, there were just a couple typos I caught that might make it clear. So there's one, Ms. Stevens noted that the implementation of the project was begun by staff no longer with the town. And then it says that what complete street idea was not explained to the neighbors. So the easiest thing would be to say, and that the complete street idea was not explained to the neighbors. If you got that page 2 of the June, and then instead of bike lanes, it says bike banes in the last sentence of that paragraph. Otherwise, things look really good.
I thought I caught everything.
Well, you caught, I mean, I only found that in all those pages, so.
Okay, so with those amendments, do I have a motion to accept? Before?
I move to accept the minutes
Okay, Mark,
as
second?
distributed and modified.
I'll second. And vote, Mark?
Aye.
Laura?
Aye.
Phil?
Aye.
And I'm an aye as well. So the meeting's, and Phil, you'll get those onto the town clerk's office?
Yep.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you.
Were there any other corrections or was that the only one in all the minutes?
That's the only ones I found.
Yeah, I didn't see any.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Okay, shares report. I've been rather preoccupied with personal stuff the last month, so I don't have anything to report. If anyone else has anything to chime in on before we get into the next one. Okay.
I'll have plenty to say later.
Okay. Yeah, you've got plenty to say. Yes. Okay. Succession planning. So the town urges that we change the chairmanship and the clerkship. I'm sure Phil will be relieved to hear that once a year. And I've been thinking about it, and I would like to nominate Laura Davis to be the new chair of the committee. If anyone wants to second that.
I'll second that.
Okay, anyone else want to nominate anyone?
Laura, are you up for this?
I'm up for
Okay.
I'm up for it. Nick, thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to it. If that suits everybody else, you have large shoes to fill though, so you may need to give me some pointers.
Very wide. I actually have to go get wide shoes. I don't wish that on you. But at any rate, we need to take a vote. So we've had it seconded. Votes, Mark Galis.
Aye.
Phil.
Aye.
I'm an aye. And Laura.
Aye.
Okay, Laura, take over. You're the new chair.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Nick, and thanks everybody for your vote of confidence. I'll do my best. I think.
What about a clerk?
Yes. So we need to. So who wants the clerk? Is the question. Phil has. Thank you for your service, Phil, over the last year. I mean, does anybody want to make a nomination? I do know that some committees also do a rotating clerk. Is that correct?
Yes,
That is clerk, that is correct. Some do a rotating clerk. Some also have these, the staff person do it, which I'm, don't necessarily want to volunteer myself for. But if there's, no one who is, looking forward to being the clerk, then I can.
Erin, I think you needed to hold that information until after we
Yeah,
open the
yeah.
floor for
Yeah.
nominations.
Yeah.
I felt you need to have all the information though, to be
Any-
fair.
Anyway, I mean, I don't mind serving on a rotating basis. It might be a little difficult to do it continuously, but I can do it for tonight.
okay. Let's see, we're missing Dan tonight, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we've got Dan.
Well,
too.
he's not here, so let's make him do it.
Well, we can
Dirty
rotate.
trick.
Rotate. By the way, is with Dan, is that the whole current committee or,
Yes.
okay,
So there's,
so there are two,
five.
how many openings?
we're two
Yeah,
openings.
Two. Yeah.
Two.
Okay.
So if you know anyone you'd like to have on the committee, get them into the process.
Yeah, have
Well,
them
I
fill out a
suggest that-
volunteer card.
If we're gonna, if we're gonna do it on a rotating basis, let's do it alphabetically by last name, and that would mean Mark is first.
Yeah, I'll do this meeting and I'll get it from the recording, so I don't need to scribble away and can pay better attention.
Good, excellent. Okay,
And I did have a question about the clerk before we move on, and Erin, you may be the person to do this. There's no collaborating on notes outside of meetings, right? It has to be one individual does it separately. We can't like use a joint document and, you know.
No, because that would be a violation of open meeting law. If, for
Okay.
instance, Mark were to do the minutes and then send them out, and then receive comment back individually and say, I noticed that there was a spelling error here, or something like that. I think that is okay, but you cannot collaborate as a group.
Got it.
So for instance, you couldn't have a Google Doc or something like that. It's best to have it all sent to the staff person to try to make sure that there are no, because sometimes, somebody replies all and then that's technically a violation. So it's difficult over email, but it's easiest to just have one person do it and then we can send it out for comment like we have been doing.
so
sounds
are you
good.
suggesting that that the comments go back to you though, Erin, or back to the originator?
I think it makes sense for it to go back to the originator if there are comments. However, if there's a bunch of different ideas flying around, I think that it's like if, for instance, we were trying to gather ideas for the RFQ, what do we want to have in there? I think it'd be best for it to all come to me to compile them all, as opposed to having, say, Mark pull them together, just to make sure that we don't have any accidental open meeting law violations.
Okay, so if you see that happening, then just call it during a meeting that there's something like that. Just mention it to whichever of us is the clerk that day.
Can I?
Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I just want to say, so, yeah, with if there's any doubt about these, it's good to ask the clerk of the town
Yeah,
or
clerk.
to directly, it's easy to ask questions directly to the Attorney General Office of Open Government. They're really good at responding. So I'm assuming that, then there's also best practice to kind of keep out of trouble, right? As opposed to getting into the gray area. So I would write up minutes and send them to Erin. And I don't know if minutes are deliberation or not. That's an interesting question. So certainly back and forth is not good.
They shouldn't be. I mean, they're supposed to just be a recording of what happened.
Right. Of course, depending who writes it up, they might prioritize. But yeah, I would assume minutes are pretty safe, but other things are not.
That sounds good. All right. So we do we have to vote on whether we're going to do a rotating basis, or can we all just? I'm going to have a couple of process related questions in these first few meetings. So just so
That's understandable.
yeah.
I would. Why not take a vote? It doesn't hurt.
Yeah. Okay. So
I'll make a motion that we
thank
do clerking on a rotating basis alphabetically.
Second,
all right, Nick, do you want to vote?
Aye.
And Mark?
I
Phil,
I,
and I'm an I. So we will have a rotating clerk. Fantastic. I will turn it over to you, Erin, for the staff update.
Great. So I have a whole bunch of stuff. I am going to pull up my screen. All right, can you all see that?
Mhm.
Great.
Yeah.
Let me move with you guys. All right. So I'm going to start with the shared streets and spaces project, which is a grant that we received last year and are working on right now. So just as a quick reminder, this is a program which is trying to do quick implementation for public streets, sidewalks, community strengthening, things like that. Last year, the focus was on speed management. And so we chose several different projects which we thought were applicable to that sort of lens, and then submitted them. And the state chose the intersection at Main and Walden, which was one of our projects. We received about a little less than $200,000 to complete this. So this was the original design. It went through because grant processes are usually very fast. We went through a fairly quick social media based community campaign to sort of gather feedback and see what people thought. Overall, people liked the gray stamped pavement that we showed. They liked the idea of having sort of a more pedestrian friendly area. Some of the things that we heard that we incorporated were the bump outs. That was something that we heard a lot from people saying that they wanted to see bump outs. So we incorporated those and did a couple of other things as well. So this is how it looks now. And then we're going to go back in time. And this is how it looked somewhere around, I think this photo is from around the late 1800s, something like that. As you can see, obviously there's dirt roads, but you can see there on the left is what is now Footstock, the old bank. You can see the what is now Main Streets Market, and you can see a lot of street trees. So that was one of the things that was brought up as maybe something that we want to incorporate again, but it feels very sort of, very Concord, but very pleasant as well. I think that, the trees add sort of a softness to the area. And here's another, I think this one's from 1850, 1860, something like that. So that's looking straight down Walden to what is now Footstock and Main Streets Market. And you can see that tree right in front, as well as our lovely horse and carriage, which is always fun to see. So this is the current view of what it looks like now. And this is the sort of general design of what we've come up with. So this incorporates those bump outs. It actually does remove one parking space, but that parking space, which is right here, right in front of where Footstock is now, we've incorporated a couple of street trees. And we've also, because it was going to be difficult with the bump out there, not impossible, but more difficult to park there. And we figured that if we're going to be creating the sort of better pedestrian area, that we might want to look at taking away that one parking space to make it more of almost a pedestrian plaza right in front of, right in the middle of downtown, to make it clear that this is a area that is focused on safety for pedestrians. We want people to walk around. We want people to shop. We want them to feel comfortable in the area. As you can see, we have the patterned surface all through the intersection. And then this is the other version. This one only has the patterned crosswalk. So there's two different options there. Both of these include the bump outs and the possibility of having those street trees here. And then they have, so this is what the difference is made with the bump outs. So for instance, on the left is if you have just stepped off of the curb, off the sidewalk and into the crosswalk, on the left is what you can see now. And on the right is the approximate view that you will get with the bump out. So you're able to see the cars and the cars are able to see you, making it much safer feeling when you step into the crosswalk, and you will still be on a sidewalk at that point with the bump outs. So I just have a couple different views here to sort of show you how much further down the street you'll be able to see. I think this one does a really nice job of sort of showing that, because you can see really far down the street just with that small change. And same with here on Walden. And then we get to my lovely mock-up. So please excuse my my mocked up buildings. They're not exactly to scale, but they're close enough to give you sort of the general idea. So what this rendering does is it's supposed to give you sort of how it might feel to be in the area. So I'm a very visual learner, so I think that it's easier to see it that way. So this is with a fully patterned in the that also shows the with just the crosswalks. So these are just a few different views. And then this is just with the crosswalks. So just to sort of give you an idea of what it could look like, because I think that it's much easier to visualize, or it's much easier to see it than to try to visualize it in your head.
You want comments? Questions?
Sure.
When I had my business in Waltham, the business came into the Moody Street area just after they'd done a major redesign, and they'd put in trees all up and down the street. By and large, the merchants hated the trees. They grew to be a real problem because they felt they obscured their businesses and it made it harder for people to pick it up. So if there are only two, and if the merchants there are fine with it, that's probably okay. It's a thing to beware of. It may not be a controversy when you start, but I'll almost guarantee you someday it will become one. And I like the pattern in the box. I like the box being filled. I think that's a much stronger message to automobiles to slow down. And it's, the message is keep out of the box. And I like that. As this project is $200,000.
Yeah.
Wow. I was going to say it would be great if you could do this, if we could do the same thing at the other two crosswalks that are just, north and south of there.
I will say that we've had many people say that. And I don't think that, while this is, we got the funding for this intersection, it's not to say that it couldn't be extended or it couldn't be done to other areas as well in the future. It is something that could be sort of done, as we go. It's not something that has to be done all at once, which is good. And yeah, so I think that one of the things that's really nice about having the bump outs is that even if it doesn't necessarily, it's not like, for instance, it's not speed bumps or something that will force you to slow down. However, the visual squeezing of the road and the narrowing of the road will cause people to slow down, as well as having the sort of different pattern will alert people that they're coming to an intersection where something's different. They may not know what it is right away, but it's those visual cues that, without having to make those sort of big changes, that will make it's sort of like a more psychological thing. However, we did look at raising the intersection, and because of the slope of the area, it really wouldn't work very well. I think they said if we raised it up to be level with the sidewalk on Walden Street, it would be close to like 3 inches above the front door of Footstock or Main Street Market, because the slope is so great between one side of the street and the other. So something that's very interesting. And then, oh, yes, Mark. Oh, you're muted.
You're muted.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to make some general comments, but I can wait till you're concluded, if it's whatever's better.
I just have a couple more slides. I might give you some information.
Sure.
Just quickly. So what I have here are a couple different options that we got for doing more of a stamped pavement. The one on the left is an actual stamped concrete. This is a picture I took up in Vermont, and I spoke to the town administrator there. They really like it. They said it's held up really well. It does take longer to cure. And depending on, I mean, I had an argument with my husband when we were there looking at it, because he thought that it was real pavers. And I said, no, this is stamped concrete. And we went back and forth, and I had to find a piece that had chipped to show him that it wasn't pavers and it was in fact concrete. So it looked pretty good in person. The one on the right is a polymer cement blend. So it is a stencil that has a very thin layer that is essentially rolled on. And it actually looks really good. These are a couple of different spots where the product that I was looking at has been used in Massachusetts in historic areas. So on the left is Market Street in Ipswich, which is in the historic district. They used it on the crosswalk as well as in the median there. And on the right is in Salem. I was very concerned about how well it would hold up. They sent me some photos from, I think it was Jersey City, where it's been there for 12 years, and it honestly looks like real brick, and it still looks really good. So I was pretty impressed. There's several different companies that do something similar, but it's definitely something to look at. All right, Mark, what are your questions?
Okay, a few comments. So I agree with, this is really, really interesting and a great project that also could be a demo for other possibilities. We'll see how, if people who like it in the idea stage like it in the reality. But I agree with Nick that the entire filled square sends a much better, much more clear visual message to motorists. I'm a little bit concerned that it might give the message to pedestrians that they can cross diagonally, and which isn't usually a good idea, especially if they're a slow pedestrian. So, random thought, maybe a really bad idea. Instead of just having the 4 sides, maybe the pattern it could be 4 sides and also printed in the middle, but the pattern in the middle could be slightly different or oriented differently, or the because the pedestrian will see the fine visual cues better than the motorist. So a secondary visual cue for pedestrians, that where the crosswalks are in the middle is a different area, might be helpful. It also might be good to think about, I have a concern as the intersection exists as is now, with the jog in the traffic coming from the west. And occasionally you see people who are confused, and there's, the left turn lane coming from the east and things. So to kind of think about that both in the summer, but also in the winter, if there's a little bit of snow cover. I don't have an answer, but I just think be good to ask some experts about how it might look in the winter, et cetera. Two more things. One thing is about how this might look with whatever night lighting is there, or if the lighting is changing. That's something to consider, because that's certainly a time when visibility is more challenging. I really like the long sight lines from the 2 bump outs on the south. I think that's fantastic. Should really be helpful, because anyway, I think should be really helpful. One last thing about the you already mentioned about maintenance and maintenance cycles and things are stuff to consider and cost. But with the trees, I understand Nick's concern, and I wonder if there are obviously asking the businesses there or the owners is important to get their feedback. But I don't know if there are any types of trees that kind of quickly develop a narrow trunk and then a broader canopy, but it may be something to find out that, because I have seen places like Nick says where it just masks the building from the street level or from the pavement, and that may not be desirable.
So I have a question and a comment. In looking at this slide, Aaron, it looks as if this proposal is a gray on gray proposal. Is that what the plan of action is, or was this just designed to show the texture?
I'm not quite sure I understand what you mean. You mean like the design, the pavement, so it'd be,
The color. So, you know, if you go back to the Ipswich slide for just a second,
Mhm.
can you just bring that one back again? Yeah, so in this slide, I actually know this spot pretty well. You can see the crosswalk is a contrasting color to the pavement. And I think that provides a visual cue to motorists. And, you know, I think it's worth considering as you think about, you know, the final design to have a contrasting color as opposed to sort of like a complementary color. Sorry to make you switch back. Can you switch back to the middle of the square again for a sec?
oh no, you want the,
Yeah, that one. So if you're coming up, I've had this experience quite a bit with both as a pedestrian and as a bicyclist. For some reason, motorists who are heading towards the end of Walden Street, okay, so they're heading towards Footstock, past the post office and the stores right there. They don't stop. They have, and I've had this multiple occasions where I've been in the crosswalk, and for some reason, motorists don't seem to be alerted to the presence of wherever the stop sign is. Not sure why that is. I mean, you know, because I'm, you know, haven't been over there today, but I think as a part of this, having the contrasting pavement color would be helpful because it would be a visual cue to a motorist. And then maybe having somebody stand down Walden Street, I don't know, whatever number of yards it is, 100 yards or 50 yards, or drive down there repeatedly to try to figure out what it is about that intersection that doesn't give motorists who are unfamiliar with the area the cue that they're supposed to come to a stop. So just you know, sort of thinking about it from personal experience.
I think I know, which is if you look at the geometry there, if you're on Walden Street and you stop at where this, as an example, where this stop line is,
Mhm.
you can't see the cars coming from the south. You have to pull forward gradually to see what's happening because of the geometry of the intersection. It's not a square.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point.
And I find that myself when I'm on Walden Street. There's two urges here. One is to see, but the other is you're afraid you're going to have to barge into traffic to make the turn. So I think that's a very real thing too.
And I think this brings up actually a really good point, which is, Aaron, I'm noticing that the bump out on the right-hand side of the picture addresses the sightline concern on Walden Street really well, but it's not, it doesn't bump out into Main Street very far. So you get that diagonal, which it may not matter so much for the pedestrians because they're really looking the opposite way. But in terms of the motorists, it brings the crosswalk further back on Walden Street. So if the bump out goes further into Main, it allows them to get closer to the intersection to be able to see oncoming traffic without impeding the crosswalk. Is that a possibility here?
unfortunately not. So because the turn radius that's needed to get from Walden onto Main Street for large trucks, which come to deliver, you know, food, goods, things like that onto the shops on Main Street, we have to have a turn radius that can accommodate them, and we can't bump it out any. It's it essentially right where the line is here. So over here, we're able to squeeze this in to closer to the line. So we only have about a 2-foot shoulder. Over here, we have to keep the wide shoulder so that they can make that turn. Same thing with the fire trucks. They have to be able to make that turn. And it's because
From
they have
Main
to make
onto Walden, are you saying?
from Walden onto Main,
From
taking
Walden.
a right, because they have to take such wide right turns. They said, we talked to the engineers at HSI, and they said that there really wasn't a way to bump it out any further because of that tight turn radius that we have there because of the geometry of the intersection, which is unfortunate.
That's too bad.
Yeah. But so there's a couple different things that I want to mention. So one, Mark, you were talking about, I think you were talking about this, the sort of to help people, guide people through the intersection. Is that right? When you said the jog, I wasn't quite sure what you meant.
Oh, well, okay, yeah, I mean, I made several several comments. So yeah, what I was saying was eastbound traffic coming from the left there. If it continues straight, it hits the left turn lane of the east and westbound traffic. And you know, if people know the intersection, they know that in advance. If they don't, and say there's a half an inch of snow on the ground, I don't know if there's any other signaling of any kind that can be done. But it's just something to think about. I don't know what the solution is.
So that's why we were looking at putting in these dotted lines that would essentially show that people can still turn here and can cross it, but to help guide people, because we do see, when we were out there, we saw several people coming through and end up halfway into the left turn only lane before adjusting back over. So this is to help guide people through the intersection and make sure that they are doing so safely and correctly. Somebody mentioned the crosswalks. So one of the things that we are doing on the crosswalks too is it's not only going to be patterned. I forgot to mention, there's also going to be, if you look at, for instance, the crosswalks at like near the Concord Museum or near Concord Academy, where they have the brick, on the outside, they have granite curbing, which is used to help hold the bricks in place. So we were looking at doing that on the crosswalks to help delineate where the crosswalks were. Because it's one of the things that we heard from people is that, and it's funny because now we've gotten sort of some mixed reviews, but what we heard at first was people did not like the colored pavement. They really liked the gray, the more sort of neutral, it looked real. The problem with doing stone, like I looked at like a cobblestone, it's not ADA accessible. And it's extremely cost prohibitive because it does not come in sheets. You have to individually lay them. And then if one gets hit by a plow, then it has to be relayed, and it's an ordeal. And bricks, they don't make them like they used to. They tend to crack and chip much faster than bricks traditionally did. And so that's why we're looking at the stamped pavements, because they do tend to wear more evenly and less often, I guess. They last a lot longer. So that's why we were looking at one of these sort of stamped pavement options, or more of a stencil, if you will, the polymer cement, which because I was very hesitant to use any of the thermoplastics because we're right next to the Millbrook. It just seems like a disaster waiting to happen to be adding potential microplastics to the area. So
Yeah, Mark, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I think no plastic. Stamped is better than trying to actually use bricks or cobblestones. I can't speak for historical commission or historic district or anything, but I'm guessing that more neutral colors with a sort of traditional look of the stamped paving is probably thought as more of a plus than if it's very colorful or two colors or whatever. But I agree with what Phil said, and I was kind of saying that too, that having something different. It could even be you could stamp pavers in the long direction on the paths pedestrians are supposed to take, and put squares or hexagons or something in the middle, just so that the drivers would see this different color and patterning that tells them it's a special area. But there would be a little bit, what you said about imitation or stamped granite curbs or whatever, in line, that certainly helps. But it's something to kind of think about and have somebody, mock up in CAD and look at. And another, when I look at this again, I noticed too that the launch off areas from the raised pavement on the south side from Walden Street, both of those are at diagonal. So again, it worries me that people launching off from there might say, oh, I can just walking off, I can just go 45 degrees. So, but on the other hand, it's kind of nice that you're sort of combining two of those into one, and that I don't know, it seems to have, even though they're bigger, it seems to have some sort of efficiency to it in terms of simplicity.
Yeah, they are relatively set up this way that they are right now. So they have just that one, as I think.
Yeah, I was trying to remember. I don't
Yeah,
remember.
I've been staring at this for too long that I'm trying to also remember, but I believe that they both only have that sort of one ramp down. I have spoken to somebody from the Commission on Disabilities, and they were also very excited about this idea because especially over here, there isn't a lot of room for somebody who is, for instance, in a wheelchair to be able to sort of be waiting to cross the street and have people passing by. There's not a lot of room before it starts to go down right now. And this would provide that sort of waiting area, I guess, for lack of a better term, to provide people a more safe crossing, which is really good and something we want to be looking to do.
And I don't know what the timeline is, but come the 250 and the one after
done.
celebrations, it'll be good to have this done because there are going to be a lot of strangers in town.
And actually, that's a great question. What is the timeline on this? When do you hope to have these designs finalized? And is this what other public input mechanisms are there for people on this?
So I'm going to be going to the business community next. So I'm going to be talking to the Chamber of Commerce, to the business partnership, to the EVC. And then I want to either host a sort of, I don't want to call it a public forum necessarily, more of like a public walk, where I want to either do chalk or cone off the areas to sort of show what it would seem like, to sort of give people a good idea so they can walk the area and sort of see the differences. We are we have to have the work done by this time next year. So we're looking to put it out to bid probably late this winter, and then begin the work sometime in the spring, the summer, somewhere around there. Other than the drainage work, because we do want to improve some of the stormwater management here while we're already digging some of it up. We have the opportunity, I think, to make some of those improvements, and it should be a fairly quick project so long as nothing goes wrong. So I know I see Nick smiling. Famous last words, right?
Right.
I had a couple other questions. One of them is really just a question of like, I would imagine that there is a best practice here in terms of like whether the stamped pavement should be in the entirety of the intersection or just so I'd be curious to know what the research says on that in terms of what is most effective in terms of traffic calming and visibility and, pedestrian comprehension of the safest routes. I'm not asking you to pull research statistics out of the top of your head, but do you have a sense of what the best practices are in the planning world for this?
So, like you said, I don't want to necessarily like speak out of turn and, say something that isn't 100% accurate, but from what I understand, it is true that oftentimes when you have something that is more pedestrian plaza looking, people do tend to think that they can walk diagonally and things like that, which we don't necessarily want to encourage, but we also want the cars to feel that this isn't just their space that the pedestrians are invading. And I think that we're trying to make it sort of a more friendly relationship, if you will. And There are locations, like for instance, in Boston that have sort of squares that have been stamped, or have, most of them have bricks or cobbles that are in them. It's used mostly as for medians and things like that. I haven't found too many that are using something quite this large. I think I saw some examples like further south in more, but they were in areas that had a lot of sort of pedestrian traffic. Like I'm not 100% sure, but what's coming to mind is like Savannah, Georgia. That could be wrong, but I've been looking at a lot of different things. And that's what's coming to mind right now. But I can definitely look and see if I can find some examples for you guys.
Yeah, it's actually less about the examples and more about, has there been a study done of, you know, before and after some of these? Because I mean, in terms of the aesthetics of it, I feel like I could go either way. If it really does reduce car speeds to stamp the whole section, I think that would be a huge positive, because speed is a huge problem in this area. But in terms of like, I think it's a trade-off here. Like, are people going to zigzag across the intersection, potentially putting themselves at greater risk? But maybe that is mitigated by the traffic being calmed more. So I'd just be curious if there has been any research done on it. You don't have to answer that right now, but that would be one comment. The other question that I had is, I was wondering if you could go to the slide where it shows the 2 trees in front of the shoe store. Your mock-up. Yeah. Actually, one more. So my question is, this is like a new space that we're creating in the center of town. And so I'm wondering if you already have ideas or have been collecting ideas for what to do with the space between these 2 shade trees, because it seems like a great opportunity for a number of different things. A bench, cycling, parking. I mean, there's you go out there on a Saturday or a Sunday and there's bikes just like everywhere, because we don't have a single bike rack in this area of town right next to, you know, one of the most popular cafes. So bike racks, or maybe even like, you know, something permeable to help with stormwater. I'm not sure if the engineers are lusting after more stormwater management space, but like, seems like there are some possibilities here. So I'd be curious what's come up already.
Yeah, so the bike rack is one that got pitched very early on, and we were really excited about. I've gotten mixed reactions, so I actually took it out of the drawing, out of the mock-up, because some people loved it and some people went, absolutely not.
What did you have for a bike rack? Was it something fancy or plain?
Oh, it was, you know, just a mock-up. So it was basically looked like a bunch of sticks put together. So they're not fancy looking when you're pulling them off of SketchUp. But so it was, we also looked at the possibility of something like a bench or something like that. Some of the comments that were made were that people don't want to be you know, sitting so close to the road watching traffic go by. It's not necessarily a great place to have a bench or something like that. And it also makes it more difficult for people with mobility challenges to move around the more obstacles you put in the way. So if we were to put like several benches so people could sit and talk to each other, then that's creating more obstacles for people, both on bikes, pedestrians, people with mobility challenges, people with strollers, things like that. The bike racks, so there are actually bike racks, they're just behind the buildings, which I think makes it you know, out of sight, out of mind sometimes. So I think that could definitely help, but I think that people also like sort of a clean streetscape, if you will. So there's, you know, there's positives and negatives to both, and it's really gonna, I think it'll take a, because it's always something that can be installed later too. So we'll sort of see how the community feels and sort of go from there. And oh, somebody said something about street trees before. So we're looking at doing sort of planter boxes, if you will, with a tree gate over there, or a tree gate's not quite the right word, but essentially it allows the tree to continue to grow and get more more water and create that sort of stormwater management additional stormwater management while also allowing the tree to grow, but not confining it like it does when you put the pavement up over the root ball. So it works both ways. And we're also putting in more stormwater management in the area. Sort of over here, there'll be catch basins, and we're looking at perhaps doing some sort of like multi-layer infiltration to help clean the water before it actually hits the sewers and things like that.
Looks like Nick has a question.
Yeah, a couple things. One is my reaction to the trees, forgetting what I said before, but I think planters would make more sense there than trees. And, you know, trees that are going to work in that environment aren't going to be native trees, for one thing. And if you put planters in, you could put native shrubs and other stuff. You know, I just think there's so many places around town where the garden club and others have done a great job of seasonally, you know, maintaining planters spaces like that. Or so I don't know. That's one thing. The other thing, I think, to me, the priority on the intersection, the main design goal is pedestrian visibility, is that cars be able to see the pedestrians. I don't personally experience that we've got a major speed problem in this area. I welcome the fact that this will slow the traffic down, but I think that if I'm designing this, getting the pedestrians more visible to the cars and getting the cars more visible to the pedestrians, that's the main design goal.
Yeah,
it looks like
I would
Phil has had
second
his-
that. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I just want to second what Nick just said. Visibility of pedestrians is a problem, I believe, right now.
Yeah, so I agree with Nick as well. And I think one of the challenges here is that, and this relates back to your comment, Erin, about, you know, speaking with people about what their design preferences were. I think people have kind of an aesthetic idea about, you know, making it look nice as opposed to making it safe. And they don't necessarily have to clash, but when you know, ask somebody, well, do you like gray on gray? Well, that appeals to a lot of people's style, you know, especially people who go to Nantucket, right? But, you know, in the world of what I think we're concerned about, which is pedestrian safety and bike safety, making the pedestrians more visible, which means making this, you know, device more visible would be a good idea. And I don't think they need to necessarily be in conflict, but, you know, if it is going to be gray on gray, maybe you have a white outline instead of a black outline, something like that, or some other way of making this stand out. The other thing I think, just to sort of throw it out there, I agree with Nick about the tree thing. And I'm not really totally clear in my own mind about how big of space that is, but it sort of reminds me of the bump outs in Lexington Center, which just got redone. And if you go over there, they have a bunch of benches which were just put in front of CVS and where Starbucks used to be. They just closed it, but those are perpendicular to the traffic. Just something to think about, because I don't know if there's enough room to make this into a sort of spot for people to hang out, but maybe that's a way of addressing that. I do know that personally, I like to hang out in that spot. And you know, when I first moved to town, I parked myself in front of Main Street Market and sat on the bench and just watched people, you know, that's a people watching kind of thing. And it was fun. So that, I think, is something that appeals to me, and I've noticed a lot of other people doing that as well. So something to think about. I don't know whether it fits. I don't know whether there's enough room, but throw it out there. And certainly, you know, metal benches aren't that expensive in the grand scheme of things. And you could do it later too.
I want to just build on a couple of things that Phil said. I think it is really important for us to be clear that the aesthetics are important. This is a historic town center. We want this to be a beautiful project that enhances the character of the community, but safety is obviously the number one priority. The other two priorities that I think are going to get railroaded in this process if we aren't careful are, one of our charges as a committee is to accelerate the adoption of multimodal transportation in the town of Concord. And I will say that as a person who uses a bicycle for transportation, the fact that there is one place in West Concord for me to lock up my bike and one place for me to lock up my bike in Concord Center is ridiculous. Would you park behind the visitor center if you were going to the post office? Because that's well, actually, that's not true. There is a bike rack across the street from the cheese shop. But like, also bicycles are things that get stolen. You don't really want to park it behind a building that you can't see. If I was going into Main Street Cafe, I would want to park it in a place where I could like have an eye on it, sit out on the bench, and like be close to it, especially if I was not riding a big heavy electric bike that's hard to steal. But if I was riding a lighter, more stealable electric bicycle. And as a result of there being no parking, the result is that bikes end up chained to the parking meters, which reduces the amount of sidewalk space for people to navigate, which is an actual problem for people who are in mobility chairs and pushing strollers. So I think that it is important, while I understand why we're leaving it off the design phase for right now, I think that we have to have a really honest conversation about like, there is actually a need for bike parking, not even in a like, we hope that more people will bike to Concord, but there is a need for more bike parking in Concord, secure bike parking. So I do think that that's important. The last thing that I'll say, and then I'll hand it over to you, Nick, is one of the other things that the community is very aware of is the fact that climate change is already here and it's accelerating. Shade trees are not just a aesthetic thing. They are a way to reduce the energy costs of buildings quite substantially. And they are a way to keep the temperature on main streets cooler so that people are more likely to shop when it is hot. I can tell you that street traffic will decline when it gets very, very hot in West Concord because there isn't a single shade tree, except for the one in front of the consignment shop. And so you can't sit out in front of the cafes there because it's 100 degrees in the sun. So the shade trees are also about climate resiliency. And we actually have, an entire plan about climate resiliency here in the town of Concord. So those are two things to be keeping front of mind, as we talk about the aesthetics, as we talk about, and I'd also be interested to see if there is research about the correlation between street trees and business traffic, because from the research that I've read, planting shade trees in main streets often increases the amount of business that happens because people like shade trees. But I'll hand it over to you, Nick, because you have a comment.
Yeah, let's see. It sounds, from the first things you were talking about with the bicycle racks, I think we need a design for bicycle racks throughout Concord Center, where they all should be, because you can't just say, well, we don't have enough, we need to put one right here, because that's not a comprehensive design. And this is kind of a, I don't know how to say this tactfully, but this is kind of a primo aesthetic space. And unless you've got a really beautiful bike rack you're going to put in, I think we lose something that we could possibly have in this space, a very special space for people just hanging out. But I think we absolutely need a better an approach to where we're going to put bike racks in the center, throughout the center. And throughout the center is the way to say it. A comment on trees. Shade trees are huge trees. They aren't little trees like this. And in my experience, most downtown businesses won't tolerate trees much bigger than this. And it's hard to get shade trees because they get so enormous. I'm thinking of the sycamores along Lexington Road and other trees. They are beautiful trees, but you got to be careful where you put them. So I think you need an arborist. If you're going to have any stuff done in here, you need an arborist and horticulturalist to figure out what's going to work and really going to thrive. So.
Yeah, I spoke to a landscape architect who gave me some different ideas for how we could have some really nice trees. And there is a guide from I think it's DOT that has trees that do well in native trees that do well in I guess more confined areas, sort of like this, in parking lots and along roadsides and things like that, that we'll definitely be using. I also just wanted to mention, so the planters, that was part of the original design, and people did not like the planters. They said that it will look terrible during the winter, and if they're not fully planted and beautiful, and will just sort of make it look, I guess, more dull than it does now. And that's why the trees could, potentially be providing, even if they are bare of leaves, provide that sort of, hope of life, I guess. And perhaps, I mean, maybe they could be strung with lights in the winter or something, I'm not sure. But then also the pavement here, while it's, so the pavement that we would use, it would either be, the cement could be dyed to be a lighter or darker color. The pavement that we see on our roads, it sort of turns that, when it starts out very dark, sort of almost black, and then it very quickly, after like a winter or two, becomes almost a light gray. That's because of the salts. So with the stamped pavements, if it's a stamped concrete or the polymer cement, we can sort of choose the color. So if we wanted it to, for instance, be darker than the rest of the rest of the roadway, or if we wanted it to be lighter or a very specific color of gray or something like that, we could do that. We have a little bit more room to play with it, so it will stand out. If that helps sort of explain it a little bit better, it won't be the exact same color as the road. It will be a slightly different color, and those choices can be made later down the road, pun unintended. And then we can make those choices to make sure that, because yes, obviously safety is the biggest thing, and we're trying to find a good balance between something that makes good aesthetic changes that will make Concord Center thrive and be beautiful, but also have those safety implications that will actually help and will actually make a difference. And so this is sort of our blending of the two, trying to find our best of both worlds. And it's all about compromise, right? Trying to find the best way forward.
Erin, thank you for that. I'm just noticing that it's 8 and we do have another very large discussion topic. So I want to know, like, what is the next step on this? So you're taking feedback from me, you're going to, from us as a committee, you're going to go to the business community next. Will this come back to us in January with an opportunity to give more feedback? What feedback will you be looking for next month that will be different from what you're looking for this month?
So I think that I will be going to the businesses next month. I'll be going to the chamber meeting at the end of January. And then I will be probably coming back to the TAC for sort of this is what I heard from the business community. This is any changes that have been made, or this is the final design. This is what everybody likes. Do you as a committee support it? And then, you can say, we really like it with the whole stamped pavement, or we hate it with the whole stamped pavement. We only like the crosswalks, or, whatever it is. And then the final approvals, I have to go to the HDC to get approval, signed off. And then to natural resources and perhaps one other committee before we can go out to bid. So trying to do it all quickly. I'm going to be writing up the RFQ or RFP ahead of time so that we are hopefully ready to go, because I think that these will be sort of a lot of these small changes can be made later, like the color of the cement or the stamped pavements. We can make that change later. It doesn't have to be in the bid. But we do need to have the sort of general specs so that we can tell people, yes, we do need to look at street trees, or that's not a part of this. Or for instance, we are stamping the entire intersection, which is obviously more expensive than just doing the crosswalks. So we need to have those decisions made ahead of time. So next time I come back to the committee, I will be needing either we support this, or we support it with these changes, so on and so forth.
So have you reached out to the HDC yet?
Yes, I've been to them twice.
Okay, great.
And
do
Mark
you
has
get
a
any
comment as
feedback
well.
from them as far as what their preference might be?
Yes, I got different feedback both times, so I'm trying to figure out what's the best path forward. They liked the street trees, they did not like the planters. Last time they did not like the because I had both the red pavers and the gray pavers. They did not like the red pavers. And then this time when I went to the HDC, they said, well, have you thought about paint? And I was like, wait a second. So I'm going to go back and see what the business community says before making sort of my my final pitch, and then going to the HDC for real to say, here is the application for approval.
Yeah, that sounds like a good plan. Awesome.
Great. Mark gets the last word on this, I think.
Well, oh, not really loud, just really quick. I want to say that I really, it's interesting how many things interlink with transportation. And I think we definitely need some maps of where there are what facilities for locking bicycles, and information about rack designs, security, whether cameras or not, and you know where people would want to go. I know that if I were going to choose between driving or riding a bike to town center or to West Concord, I would definitely want to know, where do I put the bike, right? Because it makes a tremendous difference. So I think mapping that out and coming up with a plan is really important. The other thing is, again, one last word about trees, that I'm quite sure that there are dwarf trees and semi-dwarf trees and all kinds of things, and natives. Well, what is becoming native? You know, what is native in New Jersey now might be native in Massachusetts in 10 years. So we should learn about that too, because it does affect safety, visibility, heat, and all that. So all good stuff.
Great. And you just gave me an idea. What if we made a bike, like a bike rack map, like they have the water map, the water refill map, something that people could look up and see where the closest bike rack is. But I think that also could be part of the comprehensive transportation plan, is to look at, are there facilities for putting in your bike, for locking your bike up, or are there the fix-it stations? We have one in town right now on the Bruce Furman Rail Trail in West Concord. Could we perhaps have a second one or a third one? Sort of seeing what we have right now, taking those inventories and seeing where what improvements can be made and what can we sort of look forward to in the future. But I do want to quickly, before we go to the RFQ, talk about the trolley. Very quickly. So the trolley ended in November. The 13th was the last day. Overall, we had about 950 passengers, riders, because sometimes people were getting on and then getting off and then getting back on later. We weren't counting by person, we were counting by rider, because it's pretty difficult when it's somebody doing a hand count to remember who's already been on and who got on yesterday, went to stay the night at the Colonial Inn and then is leaving today, things like that. So we served an average of about 50 per week. Obviously, it was much slower in the beginning, where we had some days where there was no passengers, and then towards the end we had days where there was 30, 40, 50 people in a day. So we were really excited to see that. The trolley tracking, which took a while to get, and it's something that if we do this again in the future will be a requisite for the start of the program, because it, I think, makes it much easier for people to know. If they know when the trolley is coming, they're not guessing. The paper maps are only as good as the trolley that's actually staying on schedule, which if there's, if the train's 5 minutes late, then the trolley's 5 minutes late and people don't know if they've missed it or if it's still coming. So having that trolley tracking is huge. And we loved having the real trolley, which is, in this picture behind here, which is a lot of fun for our last month. And it had the bike rack as well, which is something that will definitely be required from the beginning. We thought that we were going to be having it from the beginning. And then the vehicle that we were supposed to be getting was given away before we signed the contract. It was unfortunate. So next time we have these things that we're going to build into the contract ahead of time if we do get funding to continue. But I want to just go over that quickly. And then finally, the bike share also ended in just ended. And so over the course of the bike share, which began in April, we had a total of 555 riders. We, as you can see here, there, there's a whole bunch of data that we got. A lot of it is about, we had a lot of people taking longer bike rides than I expected. I figure most people would be sort of, testing it out, going to, say, a couple stops down on the Bruce Rumen Rail Trail and then turning around, something like that, or they could be going up to the North Bridge and coming back. But we actually had quite a few people taking long rides of several hours, which was really exciting to see. We also had a lot of people riding during the week, which I wasn't expecting. I expected more people to be riding on the weekends, which they did, but there was more people riding on the weekdays as well. So you can tell that people were taking long weekends and things like that because there was a spike on Monday and Friday as well. So it's good to see that it's helping with the tourism and that people are really being able to use it both recreationally as well as possibly for transit. There were a lot of trips that originated in West Concord and went to Concord Center and vice versa, showing that people were actually using them for transportation across town, which is really exciting, whether that's recreationally or just for transportation. So we had we're excited to continue the program, and I am looking into possibly expanding it. I don't want to say too much and jinx it, but I'm really hopeful that there might be some possibilities for new stations, possibly next year, maybe just in the future, but we'll see. We'll see how far we get.
So what will it take, Erin, to get both of these programs again? What's necessary at either the town level or somewhere else?
So the bike share, I'm pretty sure we'll be coming back again next year. I think we have enough funding to do that. Whether there's more bike share locations, I think is partially dependent on funding and partially dependent on if the locations want to be a part of the program. The trolley, it is dependent on funding purely. So while we could perhaps ask for another round of ARPA funding, I don't know if the town would want to necessarily do that. Even if we did that, it would be still for a short period of time. So we are waiting to hear back about the FLAP grant, which is through the National Park Service. We should be hearing back from that in December. That would fund 3 years, but it doesn't start until 2024. So we wouldn't get the funding this year. And then I got funding approved through the transportation bond bill to cover 3 years of service. And this is through the tourist season. So it's April through November-ish. And that would, we are currently requesting the funding, but it's essentially earmarked so that if money becomes available, we can possibly access it, but it's not guaranteed funding. So we have to be asking for it. That's one of the things that is on our agenda as well, is having the transportation committee agree to support a letter saying, please give us the funding so that we can continue this.
Yeah. So just so I'm clear, how much money are we talking about in order to operate the program, as during the warmer months of the year?
Sure. So the program that we have through the transportation bond bill and the FLAP grant is for 2.6 million. That's for 3 years, and that is for working with Lexington and Lincoln as well. So it would be an extended trolley from what we had this year. If we were to, for instance, just do our program again, which was just from July through November, that was $100,000.
Okay, so has there been any discussion of trying to derive any other revenue streams? I know way back we talked about having advertising and doing other things. Has there been any discussion about trying to investigate that further to defray some of the costs? Because it seems like $100,000 for this service makes sense to me. I would absolutely support it. I think it's a great idea, and these things take time to catch on, and they have to be subsidized anyway. So, and I took it. I thought it was fun and nice, and I was glad it didn't cost any money. But if it cost a short amount of money and that had a significant bump in terms of subsidizing the program, maybe that might make some sense. So I'm just kind of curious as to what you guys might have kicked around and what might be a possibility for pitching it to the finance committee.
Mhm. So I have been looking at several different options, specifically seeing if there's any, like for instance, things like meters could perhaps fund, something like this, or if we were to do some, for lack of a better term, like congestion charging, kind of idea, something that would produce funds towards transportation, not congestion charging, but that was the first thing that popped to mind. But something that would help to fund transportation is one of our ideas. We could perhaps do something like advertising. It's very difficult because we are a municipality, and the advertising is difficult to do. We have a little bit of leeway with the visitor center because that is part of, it's very much a public-private partnership in a lot of ways, with a lot of the local businesses. But we have looked at grants and things like that to see if there's any supplemental funding. The transportation bond bill is one of the things that was another way for us to see if we could get the funding, because there are a lot of people that are trying to go for the FLAP grant. So we're looking at different ways to fund it. I would also be looking to fund it for more than just July through November, because obviously people start showing up in April for Patriots Day, and even beyond that, or earlier, if it is a nice year and there's not too much snow. So hopefully, some funding will turn up. We'll hear shortly. And if not, we will be looking to see if there are any other avenues that we can take, if nothing else, to help. Like perhaps if we could come up with half of the money or something, that maybe the finance committee could find the other half. But I also don't want to necessarily be putting that onto the town, as we know that it's never going to be something that is fully funded through revenues or anything like that. So I don't want to be putting it onto the town to keep saying we need to continually fund this. So it's kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place and trying to find our way out, but hopefully we'll figure something out.
Mark's had his hand up, so let's make sure.
Yeah, quick. So I comment about the bike, a question about the bike share, but also since we're talking about the trolley, it occurs to me that one way or another, again, the money's going to be spent on the 250th and involves Lexington, and people might want to park their car in Acton and come into Concord where it's more crowded, etc. So there might be some way of getting funding through that whole gigantic state process where there's justification that we need temporary increase in local transportation and other parking alternatives, or getting people from Boston on the train, etc. So I just kind of throw that out as something. You might as well put some more hooks in the water and see if any of that can come up. I had a question about the bike share quick, which was when I look at this chart, I immediately wonder how many bike share bikes were available and how many lock stations were in the two locations, because did people go there and find none to rent, or do you know offhand, or you could put that together later and we could
Yeah, I am 99.9% sure that there was originally 6 bikes at each station. And I believe that there is space for either 10 or 12. So they should have been about half full. There were also the 2 accessible bikes, the 2 tricycles at the Concord Visitor Center. It started off that there was one in West Concord and one in Concord Center, but we had some issues with vandalism, so they both got moved to the Visitor Center where they could be more closely watched. We're hoping that in the future we'll be able to find a solution so that people can also use them on the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail without having to go all the way to Concord Center to get them. So I don't think that there was necessarily any issues with people not being able to find a bike or not being able to lock it. I never heard that complaint, so that's, I guess, a good thing to hear. We do own the stations, which is good, but it also means that we have the stations that we have. So perhaps in the future, if we're looking to expand, it might be a different number of slots that you could put the bikes into. So that'd be something to consider.
If it's easy to send me the information of the number of slots and number of bikes, or there's any more detailed data that came up in this chart, I might have a chance to look at it, might have some thoughts or questions. Thanks.
If you don't hear from me, remind me, because I'll write
Okay.
it down and then it
Sure.
might end up flipping the page and then it goes away.
Okay.
I have 2 very quick questions. One is, we will hear, you said we'll hear about the funding for the trolley soon. Do you think that that news might come before our January 10th meeting or before our February meeting, just in terms of like how much time is there to be waiting before we have to start thinking about other sources of funding?
Yeah, so the flap grants we're supposed to hear by the end of December. Supposedly, we will see. It's the federal government, so sometimes they're on time and sometimes they're a little bit delayed, so it could be later. I would be happy if we heard by the end of January, but they said by the end of December, so we'll see.
And and I have a clarifying question because I'm not sure I'm grasping this. So I'm hearing there's the transportation bond bill money and then there's the flap grant money. Are those is the transportation bond bill money to fund 2023 because the flap grant wouldn't start until 2024, or is this being used in like part fund? My question is, can you explain the funding again? Because I don't understand it.
Yeah. So theoretically, if we got both funding sources, I believe we could use both and we could essentially have funding for 6 years. I don't think that there is a timeline that you have to use the transportation bond bill funding in. I believe that they want to expend the money within 5 years of appropriating it. So if they actually gave us the funding tomorrow, then I think that if we started to use it and have it set for over the next 5 years, then that would be acceptable in their eyes. It's not something we have to necessarily, it's not one or the other, and it's not it would be filling the gap, but it's not only to fill the gap, if that makes sense.
Right. And the transportation bond bill, to my knowledge, passed in August of this year. What is the determination that we're waiting for? Is it they're trying to decide allocation of those funds at this point?
So the money was approved as written. So we were approved for the 2.6 million for the regional project. We seem to have lost Nick. Oh, maybe he'll come back in a minute. There he is.
Aaron, the regional project was with the National Park Service?
The regional project is with the National Park Service, Lexington and Lincoln. So what we're waiting for now is we are waiting to see if we're asking for the funds to be appropriated and to be actually given to us. So right now it's sort of earmarked and they say, yeah, if the money comes up, then we'll consider giving it to you. So what we're doing right now is basically lobbying them and saying, you know, you already approved this. This is something that is necessary for the region, for tourism. It's necessary for economic development. We know that people are going to be coming for Rev 250 and we need to prepare. So we'd like this funding now so that we can be prepared for the future. So we are hopeful that we will be getting that, but we have to continue to ask nicely to say, please let us have the funding so that we can make sure that we're ready for this.
So it sounds to me like there is a little bit of a time issue here in that, like, this is the moment to be asking the legislature for this money. So I wonder if this committee, I mean, if it would be helpful, it is helpful for committees to write letters to the legislature to ask for things that the communities need. So it sounds like it's maybe we should write something now, you know, between now and our January 10th meeting so that we can discuss whether we all want to sign on to a letter together. Oh, look, you've already drafted
I've
one for
already
us,
drafted it.
Erin. Fantastic.
Yeah, so I did draft this. Of course, I was being ambitious and I said it, it's today meeting. But this is something that I can send her. See Mark laughing. So this is something that I can send around and have you all look at, and we could, my hope was that at the start of the new legislative session, when we will have our new governor, when we'll have our new legislative body, that we would be able to send this out soon after, so that they haven't necessarily had a chance to get everything on their plates, and we can sort of slip this in and say, while you're new to the position, we'd love for you to do this great thing for the communities. So if you all want to take a moment and read it and say yay or nay, that'd be great. And if you want some time to review it, that's fine too.
I personally would like a chance to read it. Could we, or does anybody else have thoughts before?
So I can't see the bottom of the letter. Is it more than one page, Erin?
No, it's just this.
Okay, great. That's
So Phil wants to read it now.
Phil wants to read it now. We have a lot of other things on the agenda for tonight. So I think it might be wise for us to say, let's all take an opportunity to look at this at home. Can we send you feedback directly if we have any thoughts on things to add? And then we can maybe put this first top of the agenda for our January 10th meeting to sign on to this letter and get it sent out. Nobody's reading their emails at this time of year anyway in the legislature. This is a lame duck session. There's no point in sending it until January 10th anyway. Go ahead, Nick.
Just a question whether or not it's appropriate for a committee of the town to send something out. It seems it should come from the select board.
So we're also sending one from the select board. I think that because this is the transportation committee, that there is some weight that comes through this committee.
So it's important that they be aligned and not in no way contradictory or raise any inconsistencies that could be attacked.
Yes. I wrote both. So they are, they both get to the same points. The select boards one has had a little bit more added into it. It's similar to the one that they had for the FLAP grants that was submitted with our application, but with more information as to the pilot project and things like that. But they are similar in what they express.
So I only have one other comment, which is that if we're not going to send this out tonight, then the recipient will be I think we now have two state representatives. So, it'll be those folks.
Yep. Two new ones, or one new and one old. Yep.
So it sounds like the trolley, we've got our assignment there. Read the letter, be ready to sign it next time. In terms of the bike share, what is the grant funding that's potentially coming out for that? And when might we hear about it?
So the bike share won't have grant funding necessarily. There is funding. Hold on, sorry. My dog has figured out how to push open the door and keeps doing it. So I believe that we have the funding for next year for the bike share. It's whether we have the funding to add additional bike share locations. There are other grants that we are exploring for other transportation related projects as well, but I'm still writing those. So
The expansion of the locations would be grant funding though. So the
possibly.
year-to-year funding for the share is coming out of the town budget, and an expansion would come from a grant.
So the year-to-year for the bike share has part of it has come from the visitor center. I believe that there was money given to the visitor center for the bike share through the budget a couple of years ago, and perhaps it has been replenished by the visitor center through sales of tours and things like that. And then there was also a grant that was given to the recreation department specifically for bike shares that was presented, I believe, by the Rotary Club, but I'm not 100% sure on that. And that is also available so that we can continue to have the bike share, and hopefully we will find ways to fund it even after those have been depleted.
And last question on the bike share, and then I'll hand it over to Mark for the last word on this. What is, oh, it just flew out of my head. So Mark, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I was just kind of throw that out there that, even though it's not that far from Concord Center and the Visitor Center, I wonder if there's any business with a little space anywhere around Thorough Depot that would like to have a bike share and or bike racks, more bike racks. It'd just be worth kind of sending the word out, seeing if anybody wants to help out.
So I'll second Mark's idea. I think that's a good idea.
Guys are reading my mind.
I remember the other question, which was start date for the bike share. So you said that it's ended for the season, so the bikes have been removed. Do you have a date for when they'll be reinstalled?
It's typically around the beginning of April. So we try to get them in before Patriots Day. If there's no snow on the ground, we try to do it like the first week of April.
Fantastic. Okay, great. Shall we move on to the next topic?
Yes. And that is the RFQ. Let me pull that up. Or do we want to look at it, or would we rather, does anybody have any initial comments or questions? I know that Mark, you and I spoke a little bit about it, or emailed back and forth a little bit. Did anybody have any immediate thoughts? I see Mark.
If that's okay. Yeah, just a couple of things. I just want it was a little bit new for me to see something that was RFQ that was request for qualifications as opposed to quotation. So I'm not sure if everybody understands, but it's like this, maybe Aaron, you could explain a little. There's a two-step process that's allowed under state law or whatever. That's a little different than if you actually know what the plan is or something like that. So I think that'd be helpful for people to know that.
Yeah, so I'm not an expert at the procurement process or bidding process, but as I understand it, the request for qualifications is to make sure that we can find a firm that can complete the job in a satisfactory manner, as opposed to someone who has the lowest bid and can check all the boxes. So that's sometimes what happens when you just put something out to bid. You get somebody who says, yes, we can fulfill all of the requirements that you have added into this procurement process, into the bidding process. And the request for qualifications is asking people to provide where have you done this before? Do you have experience with this? Can you tell us about your team? Is it not to say that freshmen in college, couldn't do a fantastic job, but do you have a team that's all freshmen in college or freshmen in high school, or do you have people that are experienced in this work, that have done this before in other locations, things like that, things that people who are going to be, creative problem solvers, things like that. 'Cause we want to make sure that if we're going to do this, we want to do it right, and we don't want to be saying, I really wish that we had had somebody who knew A, B, or C. So the request for qualifications is to make sure that we can find firms that can really do what we want to get out of this process.
But so the one thing I'm not clear about, which is that legally, because it's a municipality, going to ask for somebody to do a project for money. To what extent do there have to be very clear criteria, kind of pass fail, so that then we need only go back to the people that passed for the second stage? I just think it's, how detailed and important, and what it need to be the important kind of check marks, or what degree of objective criteria has to be laid out by us, so that it doesn't appear that we've made an arbitrary decision later.
Sure. So we typically have a scoring sheet that we will create that will say, a 5 is they have, so for instance, people who are, or they've done projects like this. So if they have done, they have a portfolio full of projects that are extremely impressive and are exactly what we've been looking for. They're, they're comprehensive, they're creative, they're looking at solutions that aren't just auto oriented. They're looking at really that multimodal, then that might be a 5. If they perhaps have done some work, but haven't ventured into all of the realms that we're interested in, or perhaps have only done a couple of things like this, but not everything, not as many as we would have liked to see, then maybe that's a 4, and so on and so forth. So that criteria will be partially laid out by the town for you all to look at and say, yes, we agree with, or why isn't there anything about, why is there nothing about how many projects they've done in this criteria list? Shouldn't that be something we're looking at? Things like that, to make sure that we are hitting all those different things that are going to be important in the process. And then you all will take a look at it and say, yes, we agree with this. We think this is good. It's not a perfect process, but we try to make it as complete as possible, so that we're being fair to the people who are presenting their qualifications and perhaps bidding on the project, as well as that we're getting a good product out of the conversation that we're having.
Yeah, one thing I was puzzled, but I've been puzzling on it separately about this, is if you try to think about people who have done work in communities or towns similar to Concord, I can't really find many towns similar to Concord. Concord's rather unique in all the combination of things. So it's just an interesting thing to sort of contemplate. But what constitutes a good track record for what we want, especially because we're trying to be forward-looking in some new, innovative ways. Thank you.
I had 2 comments about the sort of scope of the work that we want these folks to do that speak to sort of like the qualifications we might look for. And these are really questions for this committee and for you, Erin, which is, the first is, I watched the process of the development of the climate action plan, the climate action and resilience plan that we have. And, one of the takeaways that I had from it is it would have been good to have a more robust education and training after the plan was created. We have this tendency as a town to create wonderful reports, and then implementation of those reports is, varied. And I think that one of the things that might be very helpful moving forward is, once the plan is created, we should have educational, presentation decks specifically to educate, the select board, the town staff, members of committees that are relevant, whose, charges overlap with transportation, and have the help from, the question is, should we have the help? Is that within the purview of this group? Is there somebody on staff who's going to take that on? Is that the charge of this committee? So that's one of my questions, is, should education be a part of the scope of this work? Mm-hmm. And the other question that I didn't see in here was, is this
Mhm.
are these consultants going to be running the public input process? Is part of their charge to have listening sessions with the affordable housing community residents? Is it to run public forums, or again, is that the charge of this committee? Is that the charge of staff? So just wanted to get clear about those two things, public input and education of, municipal employees, committee members, and the public about, the outcomes of the report.
Mhm. So the education and implementation plans, that was kind of what I was thinking of when I was looking at, for instance, when I was talking about the best practices. I think that it's important for them to give us we can look at the best practices, for instance, from the Complete Streets Design Guide that the American Planning Association has put together. But what I really want to look at is, can they provide something that is specific to Concord? So could they provide something that, like you said, explains what a complete street is? What does that mean? What does what does sharing the road with bikes mean? What does it mean to have pedestrian oriented streets, things like that? Whether that is slide decks or whether that is an easy to use guide that we can then turn into slide decks, if, for instance, we want to be presenting to the select board, or if we want to be having a neighborhood meeting and explaining to these concepts to people, that we have something to point to. An example that I really liked is Charlotte, North Carolina. They have a plan that was done, I want to say in 2006, 2010, somewhere around there. I think that they did a really nice job of taking the general design principles and saying, here's how it looks on a local street. Here's how you implement complete streets. Here's an example from your community. So sort of showing how it can be implemented in that way. So it's something that is easy to go back and look at, but doesn't necessarily have to be in a slide deck format or something like that. That might be.
Let me clarify my question, actually, because I think that the idea of us needing to distill best practices from national and international guidelines and make them relevant to Concord is unquestioned. I'm actually asking, I see there being a need to have actual experts present and have a meeting with the select board to present their findings in a way that allows people to ask questions, to deepen their understanding, because not everybody can read a best practices guide and get anything out of that. That's not everybody's learning style. And that's a lot of work. If we're talking about the select board, we're talking about the Historic Districts Commission, we're talking about this committee, we're talking about the Disability Commission, so that it sort of feels like there needs to be a roadshow once the report is finished. And the question is, should the roadshow be your job? Should it be our job? Should it be the consultant's job? Who do we have the capacity within the town to deal with that amount of education? So the format of the presentations or whatever is, that's beside the point. It's really, is it their job to be educating us about the findings of the report, or are we just looking for a written report?
I understand. So I think that it'll definitely be a part of what they help us with. So it may be that, for instance, I am working with them and going to, do the dog and pony show to all the different committees, or it may be that we invite various committees to a public forum where they present. That's been done in the past for various projects. I think that it's difficult to know ahead of time how many boards and committees are going to want to have that level of question and answer and sort of like that face-to-face time, versus do they just want to be able to watch it later and sort of understand what was happening. So I think that some of that will come with when we start the process and see how involved these various committees want to be. However, I hear what you're saying, and yes, it definitely, if you don't see that is clear in here, then we need to make that clearer, I think, because I think that that's definitely a piece of it. Same with the the public process. That's a huge part of what this is. We need to make sure that nobody knows Concord better than the people that live and work and spend their lives there. So we need to be reaching out to various neighborhood groups, committees, boards, you know, short of walking door to door and asking people, you know, what do you want to see happen in your community? But also, you know, wandering the community ourselves and saying, you know, as you know, speaking as a consultant, for instance, you know, I want to go and see all the different streets and say, well, this is an obvious issue. Why hasn't this been solved yet? And trying to find all of those different things so that we can make sure that people are going to be raising certain issues, but they may not be the issues that we're thinking of. So somebody may say, there's a lot of speeding on my street, but that might not be the biggest issue. It might be that you feel that there's a lot of speeding on the street because there isn't a sidewalk, so there's no safe place to walk. You know, it could be things like that. So really looking at, that's why I want to take this sort of holistic approach, but the public process is a huge part of that. I tried to bake that in, but if not, we should definitely make sure that that is very clear in there, because that is a huge part of this process.
It could be that I missed it, but I think that we should clarify a little bit more about what it means to have a public input process, because there's a whole set of facilitation skills and listening skills that are very particular to community input gathering. So yeah, I'd love to see a little bit more of that in the plan. And Mark's hand was up next, so I'll shut up.
No, thank you very much. Yeah, no, I think your point, Laura, is very well taken about the education, you know, give and take, and for people to learn, you know, to really understand what's going on. What Erin said, I completely endorse, and I think is I hadn't thought of it, but I think it's really key, is how involved do the various town committees or organizations that already exist that have, you know, some responsibility related to this, which ones want to get involved very intimately with the give and take in the process, and how many just want to kind of look at a plan that's been developed to a certain point. When Laura was mentioning about the education part, one thing that came to my mind, I'm not sure if this resonates with anybody else, but I remember going to kind of evaluation after, I forget which one it was, even one use of a consultant in town. And one of the comments that kept stuck in my mind was, I wish instead of a consulting firm, we actually had a consultant, a single person that we could really put on the spot and ask to explain things. So I think there are firms that are really good at generating reports, but if you want customized vision, you do need to have either that person in a larger firm or, you know, whatever, but you need to have an individual that you can really have that back and forth with, who knows the answer, you know, knows options or can get them. So that somehow the point of contact, you know, I think you guys know what I'm trying to say. I'm not saying it very well, but it goes to that fact of how can people choose things if they don't know what they are and they can't get their questions answered, and you know, all the way down to implementation.
Yeah, I definitely hear what you're saying, Mark. I think that's something that I've always taken for granted, is I've always had a point person when going through a process like this, whether I was sort of a key player or not. There was always somebody that I could email and say, hey, I had a question. And it wasn't let me go find somebody who has that answer for you. It was, yes, I've been working on this for the past 6 months and I'm right there with you. And here's the answer that I have. Or I'm not sure, let me ask my colleagues, but yes, I am your point person. I am your, you know, your rock in the storm, so to speak. So I think that it's very important that we have that. And perhaps that's something that we should definitely make clear is necessary. I've always taken it for granted, and perhaps that's not necessarily going to be the case with every firm that may be interested in working on this. So we can definitely make that clear.
Phil had his hand
I
up
would
next.
just say, you know, how much do they want to reach more than halfway to us, rather than us have to reach more than halfway to them, in terms of understanding what different people in Concord desire or prefer.
Mm-hmm.
So sort of piggybacking on both of the comments from Laura and from Mark, personally, I think that the public education component is more important than doing a report. And if there's any way to make it clear that the value to the town is the public education, and it's a continuing publication education component. I think that's kind of a key to this. One of the things that I noticed when I first started getting involved with this stuff is that we already have a lot of reports. I mean, if the work product is supposed to be a report, well, we can just give the person the pre-existing reports. I don't think that's going to change all that much. I don't think public sentiment has changed all that much. But I think hitting the point that Mark made, which is to have somebody, and ultimately, I think, maybe I hate to say this, Aaron, but I think you're the person that people are going to turn to. But have somebody that you can turn to as your person who really has a lot of this stuff at their fingertips. I think that's a key element in this. There's two things that I think I would love to see in the document itself, and that is, I think somewhere in the bullet points on page 3 where it talks about scope of services, and I just skimmed this, but I didn't see the word safety. And, even though I think it's probably inferred by the complete streets, I mean, just putting the marker down and saying, public safety is, a key element here. That's what we're striving for. It's not just about getting more cars through a given spot. It's really about people being safe on the roads. And then the other piece of it in terms of funding and grant funding is maybe we can expand that to say financing, because how we finance the improvements is a really key element. We know that the DPW has put out a proposal as to what they think it's going to take just to bring the roads up to good instead of fair, and that's been rejected. So maybe there's another better way to skin the cat, but it would be great to have somebody who not only knows their stuff in terms of design, but who knows how to figure out how to get these things paid for, because that's a big challenge for us. I want to say one other thing on this idea, and that is, can you tell us how much the select board or the town manager or the finance committee has budgeted for this idea, and whether or not it's a one-off, or whether or not this is going to be a continuing thing? So, because my preference would be that we advocate for this is, a feature of our town. We have big challenges, and we don't just need a one-off. We need continuing focus on this issue over many years.
So I think it's, so to the point of the funding, there is a line item in the ARPA funds for transportation, which partially funded me and partially is funding this. It was very general, and I said that I think that in order for us to continue to know where to go, we really need to look at the town comprehensively. It hasn't been done before that I know of in terms of transportation. Obviously, we've done the long range plan and things like that. But that was not focused on transportation and taking a holistic look at it. So the rest of the funding, I believe it's about, I want to say around 150,000 that we have. So it's a fair bit.
And does that include you, or is that just for this RFQ?
That's just for the comprehensive plan.
Okay, all right. So, my hope is that, as we proceed, that I see Terry's on the line, so, maybe we can vent Terry or two, that we advocate not just for this as a lump sum and it's done, but, that somehow or another in our however many hundreds of $1 million budgets that we have for this town, that we find $150,000 every year for the next whatever number of years it's going to take to get us from where we are today, which is not ideal, to a better place. So hopefully that's something that people are willing to feel comfortable with.
I think that it's important to note that the funds that have been set aside, so for this plan, this is meant to be sort of a starting point so that we have we are able to take a look at the town comprehensively, get the best practices and things like that. We don't want a study that will continue for the next 10 years. Because I don't think that we'll be getting any new information necessarily. I think that it's
No.
something that I want to make sure that this is, for lack of a better term, a living document. It's not something that's going to sit on a shelf and we can point to and say, look, we made something nice. But this is something that that's why I really want to have those best practices in there. That's why I want to have that priority list of projects in there, because we're going to be using it, for instance, when Complete Streets funding comes up, when Shared Streets and Spaces grants come up, we can go to the list and say, what are the projects that we have already identified as being necessary? And then we can say, also look at what funding sources they have identified. There could be things that we're not thinking about, especially with the infrastructure bills that are out there right now. There's more money for infrastructure than we've ever seen really in our lifetimes. And possibly won't see again. So we want to make sure that we're getting the most out of this. And so we want to make sure that we're doing this quickly and can act on it. But also looking into the future, because we know that it's not going to stay the same. You know, people are going to come and go, the roads are going to change. Maybe we'll get the Concord Rotary will go away and we'll have a lovely flyover and we'll have all this new space and we won't know what to do with it, and we'll have all kinds of opportunities, and we don't know what will happen, but we want to have something that we can point to and say, okay, we've talked about this, we've looked at this, we've looked at the town comprehensively. We know that we want people to be able to walk. We know that we want people to be able to bike. We want people to feel safe. We want, there's a lot of things that we want to have in this community. And I think that we don't want this to just be a report. We want this to be, like we've been saying, a roadmap, somewhere where it can help guide us. And
Erin, can I just ask a clarification, or see if I can rephrase this a little bit? My understanding is that we're hiring a consultant to front end the work here. We need a consultant to come in and get us started so we can take advantage of this historic amount of money that's available for transportation projects right now.
Yeah.
And I think that we should continue the conversation. And I'm also cutting you off because we're approaching 9 o'clock, so I want to wrap this up. But we should continue the conversation about how this becomes a living process, where this committee is revisiting the document on a biennial, quarterly basis, perhaps, to make sure that we are continuing to make progress and to continue to make sure that the town understands. I keep thinking back to the Complete Streets plan. Nobody knows how this plan was made or why or what we're supposed to be doing with it. So I think that we need to build into our processes as a town how we're keeping the document moving forward as we go ahead. But to bring this to a close, I want to ask, what is the decision point that needs to be made here tonight on and what is the timeline for feedback on this? Because I have a little bit more feedback, but I could give it to you directly if we don't need to discuss it. So what do you need from us tonight, Erin?
If you all could send me any comments, any feedback that you have, preferably in the comments or redlined in the RFQ, and send it back to me, then I can go through and integrate those comments, that feedback, and make sure that we have something that's everybody's happy with. And then I will start circulating that with the town staff, see if they have any additional things. And then it will come back to the committee for a final okay before we start looking to actually go out to bid. I will mention just one last thing is in terms of continuing the work after the project is done. So that's one of the reasons that we put the somewhere at the top, it says, and Mark pointed this out, something about, we reserve the right to continue to work with the firm after, if we're happy with the work and we want to continue. So that is something so that if, for instance, the consultant that we're working with has a fantastic idea for how to get people across Route 2 safely and happily, and we are just absolutely floored by it, but they're not the low bidder when we're going to design the project, then the next person says, no, we don't like that at all. we want to have the opportunity to continue to work with the people that we've been working with if we feel that they are the best people for instance, you know, a fabulous bridge over Route 2 or, you know, something, I don't know. We're going to tunnel under.
I have one other actually question related to that, which is sort of a substantive question about qualifications, which is just this committee has mostly concerned itself with things that are within the purview of the town of Concord, things that we have control over. Things like the MBTA station and crossings on Route 2 involve a host of state level agencies. And so my question is that going to, I mean, it kind of needs to be in a comprehensive plan. So I think that was not clear to me in the RFQ, that we want somebody who has an understanding of the state level agency alphabet soup that needs to be tapped if we wanted to, for instance, make the Concord Depot train station accessible to people with wheelchairs, or we want to do something about crossing at Route 2. So that was one clarification. We do want this to include those more complicated issues. Is that true?
I think so.
Okay.
That's my inclination. I think that it is important that we're considering those things, because I mean, obviously Route 2 divides Concord in half. And we'd really like to find a way to, you know, help unify it in at least, you know, a couple of spots to help solve that issue. Obviously it's because it is, you know, working with the state government, it's a totally different game than working with the towns, or even working regionally with the towns that surround us, the other municipalities. But I think that if we have somebody who can perhaps give us some pointers for how to work with Mass DOT, or say, you know, here's the person that you have to bug, and here's here's their number. Let's set up a meeting. Let's see what we can do here. Can we get you on the projects list? You know, there's some things.
Right. Yeah. Just having roadmaps for some of those more complicated issues, I think is, yeah. So if that could be a little bit more clear, I think that would be helpful. Are there any final comments on this before we move on to the last? Great. So I think that we leapfrogged over your last agenda item, Erin, because you were going to ask us about that letter, and I missed that was what that letter was until we discussed it. Anything else on that before we do comments?
Nope, I will send that around, and you all can give me any comments that you have, and then we can review it and you can sign off and say, yes, we love it at the next meeting.
So just to review next steps for us, we are reviewing that letter. We're also reviewing for the request for qualifications, and we're sending any comments on either of those things back to you.
Yeah.
And all right, so let's open it up for comments from the public.
We have Terry.
Go ahead, Terry.
Hi, I am very excited about the discussion tonight. I think this is the real purpose of the Transportation Committee, to take a strategic look at the whole transportation system in town. And I'm just really excited about the work you're doing with the RFQ. And I do agree with Phil. I think eventually we will have it in our budget for a good amount of money, but this is a very good start that we're already funding Erin's salary and the RFQ. Considering where we were a year ago, we had 0 for transportation. So we're making good progress, and it's because you folks are putting in the time and energy with Erin to really work on it. So that's great. 2 other really quick questions, comments, because it's late. The trolley was a very good innovation, but I think that when we continue it, we need to look at how to get the cost down per ride, because if we're looking at it now, it's more than $100 per ride right now, $100,000 for 1,000 rides. So we need to try to, rein that in. And finally, I had a follow-up from a previous meeting where Concord Academy came in, and they were talking about the 57 parking spaces that were going to be lost. I recently went to an event in the library, and there was absolutely no parking anywhere on Main Street. So I'm just wondering if anything happened, because I know that Concord Academy is now going to the zoning board, and they got approval from the planning board. So what is happening about those parking spaces?
So as far as I understand it, when they came to talk to Transportation Advisory Committee, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that we basically just said we would really encourage you. We don't have any ability to say yay or nay, but we really encourage you to look at transportation alternate modes and encouraging students and faculty to take other modes. I have also spoken to Concord Academy and also expressed that and tried to come up with several different ways to do that. I also spoke to Elizabeth Hughes and tried to come up with perhaps some other ways that we could help to get more people out of their cars and into alternate modes of transportation, whether that is through Concord Academy, perhaps, helping us to fund some transportation options, things like that the students could take, and the general public. I don't know quite where those conversations went.
Right,
But
I guess my question is, I just want to make sure that the planning board and zoning board are aware of this when they make their decisions. Do you know if they're aware of it?
I don't know, but I can certainly ask, and we can
Okay.
find out.
Thank you.
Just one comment, Terry, because I followed this a little bit. They're asking for a huge exemption from the normal parking requirements for a school.
Right.
It's just almost obscene. And I can't believe that the business community hasn't raised more objections to it.
I don't think they know about it. I think you're right.
Well, there's nothing we can do. We have no jurisdiction to do anything other than.
All
note
you
the
can
problem.
do, is talk to the zoning board or the planning board and make sure they know about it. That's all you can really do. But I just want to make sure they know about it when they make their decision.
Well, I guess the question back for you is, how could they not know about it? I mean, to give an exemption from a parking requirement, that's a huge thing. Especially when
Yeah.
we're talking about something like, what, I forget what the number, like 50 spaces?
57.
Right.
They already had an exemption, and now they're asking for an even bigger exemption.
Well,
I
I
mean,
agree with
who's-
you. How could they not know? But
Yeah,
how
yeah,
it just seems to be on their radar. That's why I'm bringing it up, that maybe Aaron could just check and make sure they know about it.
well, I don't know if that they have criteria. I don't know what, yeah, I don't know.
I don't either.
So I'm curious, what is the permitting process going forward, and when?
There's a requirement that certain types of facilities, such as schools, have to have a certain number of parking spaces based on the size of the school, whether that be number of classrooms or students or whatever. There's some formula.
Mhm.
The Concord Academy has an existing exemption from that that's significant. They're asking for it to be increased by something like 57.
Right, but
57 parking
when they approach the Board of Appeals and the Planning Board, they're looking for, I assume, a special permit or site plan review or some other regulatory process. So my question was, when is that actually happening?
It's happening. It's happening now.
So the public hearings on that have started?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right, but they're continuing. They haven't closed.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. See, I guess I don't know how we can speak up at the Board of Appeals and say anything, because we don't have criteria for parking. It's
Well,
their criteria. They're the ones who should be, concerned about this.
Right, but I think what we could do is we could point out to the Board of Appeals, just what you said, Nick, that there are these criteria that, the proposal is to put 57 parking spaces off of the campus and back onto the street, which will have an impact that will radiate out into the neighborhood. And, I don't see any reason, I think it's a well-taken concern, and we should put something in a letter that says, we're concerned about this, just like any other committee has an opportunity to put their
Yeah.
thoughts into writing.
I think, Terry, do you know when the next one is? Because I don't know when the next hearing is.
I do not, but I know that it's very soon because the planning board has approved it and sent it to the zoning board, but I don't know when that meeting is.
Yeah, I suspect there isn't time for us to get something together as a committee before their next meeting. Because I think they're meeting maybe this Thursday. I'm not sure. I think they
Well,
meet on Thursday.
Ultimately, it's when they close the public hearing, because that's when,
Right.
you know, that's the real deadline. So I suppose we could find out. Maybe you could find out for us, Aaron, and just, you know, give us a heads up.
So the next zoning, yes, I'm on zoning, meeting is January 12th. The last one that they had was December 8th. So the next one.
Okay.
All right.
So we
that-
could put this on our agenda for next month, for the January 10th meeting.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, let's do that then, if you don't.
Yeah. So I think that's a good idea. We should have that.
I think one other thing, you know, I pulled up the meeting minutes on this. And, you know, I do remember the end of that conversation being somewhat dissatisfying because there was a lot of lip service paid to, oh, well, we want our students to do other things, but they hadn't collected any data. They hadn't really invested any time or money or effort into mode shifting for their students. And I think it would be a good idea to go back to them and say, so we had a conversation. We'd love to know, you know, what your plans are moving forward on mode shifting for your students. I mean, even regardless of which way the zoning board goes, that should be happening anyway. So that's we could have a follow-up conversation with them perhaps.
Yeah, we should definitely do that. And the other thing is, it's not just the students, it's the part-time
Teachers as well.
faculty,
Yeah.
staff people.
Staff
So-
as well. Yeah.
Might be a good time to ask for a payment in lieu of taxes.
Yeah.
Do we
I have brought it
any-
up.
Do we have any pilots in this town with any of the institutions?
No.
Oh. That's how you were going to pay for the trolley.
That was an idea that I had.
Okay,
Thanks,
I
Nick.
don't,
That was a good idea.
I brought it up to Concord Academy. They were not particularly excited about my idea, but
They're
I
never,
can't imagine why.
they're never excited about the idea.
Thank you for bringing it up. At some
Yeah.
point, it might seem attractive to them. you know.
Right, when it's $50,000 a year per head going into the school, where's that money going? That's what I want to know.
okay.
All right. I would entertain a motion to adjourn for the night.
So move.
Second,
Mark, how do you vote?
Aye.
Phil,
aye.
Nick,
Aye.
and I am an I as well. I also just want to say thank you, Aaron, for talking us through so many things tonight. You are a sight to behold, the amount of information that you have in your head. So thanks so
Thank you.
much for being here.
Great job. And
Very
happy
welcome.
holidays to everybody.
Yes, happy
You as
holidays.
well.
Thank you to everyone on the committee. Happy
Thanks,
holidays.
Terry. Happy holidays.
Thanks, Laura. Good job.
Yeah.